Hello everyone, I am Dr. Surbhi Uniyal and I teach philosophy at the School of Liberal Arts, Bennett University. We are doing a lecture series on Indian knowledge system. In today's lecture, we will be discussing about various spiritual traditions in India. The Indian knowledge system is distinguished by its fundamental orientation towards spirituality as the organizing principle of existence and understanding. Unlike intellectual traditions that separate the sacred from secular or religion from everyday life, Indian traditions view spirituality not as a compartmentalized domain, but as the essential dimension of reality itself. The Sanskrit term Adhyatma captures this orientation as it literally means pertaining to the self, but encompasses the entire domain of inner experience, transcendent realization, and the cultivation of consciousness towards ultimate truth. This spiritual emphasis does not represent escapism or otherworldliness, as sometimes mischaracterized, but rather a sophisticated recognition that the quality of consciousness determines the quality of existence, and the transformation of awareness constitutes the most fundamental form of knowledge. Indian religious and spiritual traditions are therefore not simply systems of belief or social organization, but integrated disciplines of consciousness, structured methodologies for the experiential investigation of reality, and conceptual frameworks oriented towards the attainment of what they define as the highest human aim, that is, liberation from suffering and the realization of one's true nature. From the Vedic religion, with its elaborate ritual cosmology, to the contemplative depths of Buddhism and Jainism, from aesthetic devotional movements to tantric transformations of body and energy, or from yogic disciplines to Sikh synthesis, each tradition represents a distinct answer to fundamental spiritual questions, while participating in a shared civilizational conversations about consciousness, liberation, and ultimate reality. What unites these diverse traditions beneath their doctrinal differences is a shared conviction that ordinary human consciousness operates under fundamental misapprehension, that this misapprehension generates suffering and limitation, and that systematic spiritual practice can dispel this ignorance and reveals reality as it truly is. The emphasis on direct realization rather than mere belief, on transformation rather than information, on practice-based verification rather than faith alone, gives Indian spirituality its distinctive character. So this lecture explores the major religious and spiritual traditions of India examining how each constructs distinctive spiritual paths while contributing to the broader Indian emphasis on spirituality as the ground of meaningful existence. Starting with the Vedic religion. Vedic religion, systematized in the 4 Vedas, constitutes the earliest layers of Indian spiritual thought that establishes foundational patterns that continue to inform later traditions. Its worldview is defined by a form of ritual consciousness, wherein the cosmos is understood to function through structured relations of correspondence and reciprocity, sustained and activated by the exact performance of ritual acts. So, this tradition basically emphasized on the ritual acts. The Vedic pantheon consists of deities that articulate specific natural processes and cosmic functions. For example, Agni, the fire deity, mediates communication between human and the divine domains. Indra, the warrior deity, preserves cosmic stability through the defeat of disorder. Varun administers cosmic and moral order, that is Reet. Surya embodies solar force, etc. So, these deities are not treated as metaphorical constructs, but as operative, immanent powers intrinsic to the structure of reality. Talking about Vedic or ritual acts, the yajna, which is sacrifice, serves as the central ritual for engaging these powers, instituting a formally delimited sacred space-time in which cosmic relations are ritually reenacted. Forces are systematically activated and divine agencies are sustained. These are some rituals which have been emphasized in this kind of Vedic traditions, where sacrifice rituals constitute the central part. Vedic ritual is understood not merely as means to obtain worldly benefits, but as a creative act that sustains cosmic order. Texts such as Purusha Sukta portrays the universe itself as arising from the primordial sacrifice, linking rituals to both cosmic structure and social order. So, these rituals were not merely for personal gains itself. It has a larger context to it, wherein these rituals were seen or performed for both cosmic structure and for the social orders. So, ritual efficacy depends on the priest's precise mastery of sacred sound, reflecting a theology in which Shabda is a creative force. This emphasis on sound shapes later Indian traditions, while the Upanishads reinterpret sacrifice inwardly, transforming external rituals into internal discipline aimed at realizing identity with the ultimate reality. So, the same ritual of, if we consider, of sacrifice as has been seen in the Vedic traditions, were later reinterpreted by different traditions in different ways. As mentioned in the Upanishads, these sacrifices were not the outwardly sacrifices, but these sacrifices were done internally. And how that sacrifice is aimed for transforming individual, for realizing the ultimate truth by realizing the identity of the self with the Supreme Brahman. So, Upanishads represent a revolutionary transformation in Indian spirituality. From ritualism to mysticism, from external action to internal realization, from maintaining cosmic order to transcending conditioned existence together, where the individual again needs to focus on the unity of the self with the ultimate. So, these external actions, as has been mentioned in the Vedic traditions, were then reinterpreted in the Upanishadic tradition as to focus on the internal realization and for transcending this conditioned existence altogether. So, the central spiritual discovery of Upanishad is the identity of Atma, that is the true self, with Brahman, that is the ultimate reality. So, this is not just a philosophical abstraction, but it is seen as experiential realization towards which Vedantic, or you can say not Vedantic, but the Upanishadic teaching points out. So, this discovery of relating the individual self with the Brahman is through an experiential realization and not just an abstract philosophy. So, the spiritual quest shifts from securing benefits within samsara, that is the cycle of death and rebirth, to achieving moksha, that is liberation from samsara itself. So, we can see how the shift has taken place here, wherein earlier we were looking for securing benefits from this samsara, but now it has moved on to achieving ultimate moksha, wherein the liberation from the samsara itself. So, this establishes what becomes perhaps the central spiritual axis of Indian traditions, that is the recognition that ordinary existence is characterized by dukkha, suffering, that results from avidya, which is ignorance of one's true nature, and that spiritual practice aims at vidya or jnana, that is liberating knowledge, that ends suffering but by revealing one's fundamental nature. So, we can see that how the link between dukkha, suffering, comes from avidya, that is ignorance, and in order to be liberated, one needs to have knowledge in order to remove that avidya, which will ultimately lead oneself to the realization of the fundamental nature, and that itself ends the suffering. The famous teachings of the Panchkoshas in the Taittiriya Upanishad guides spiritual investigation through progressive layers of identity, from the physical body through vital energy, mind and intellect to the bliss sheath, with the invitation to discover what lies beyond all sheaths. So, this is in a way talking about transcending and realizing what is the true nature of reality is by transcending these layers of identity. Now the instructions of Yajnavalkya to his wife Maitri reveals the spiritual psychology of the Upanishads. All particular loves and attachments ultimately point toward love of Atma, which alone is immortal and unchanging. So this was the instruction which Yajnavalkya gives to his wife when they had a discussion about love, and he tells her that this love and attachment is basically towards the Atma, and this Atma is immortal and is unchanging. This is important again to see the significance of Indian philosophies, that how they are emphasizing on the love towards the Atma itself and not to the individual embodied person. Moving now to Buddhism. Buddhism, though classified as heterodox for rejecting Vedic authority, develops from the same cultural matrix and addresses similar, you can say, concerns while reaching radically different conclusions. So here we can again see that though there is a difference that has been drawn in different schools of Indian philosophy, wherein Buddhism is seen as rejecting the Vedic authority, we can see some linkages of how talking about spirituality here, though there is a major difference, but again how we can see some similarity in the cultural matrix and how they address these concerns in different manner, but again there are certain similarities that we can see here. So beyond its practical framework, Buddhism advances a highly developed philosophical inquiry into consciousness, causation, and the nature of reality. The doctrine of Anatmavad, which is non-self, directly contests the Upanishadic concept of Atma, maintaining that careful phenomenological examination discloses no permanent or immutable self, but only a dynamic continuum of physical and mental aggregation. And this is where we can see a departure or a different perspective which Buddhism has proposed, where the Atma, the self, is not seen as a permanent self, but in Buddhism, self is seen as a continuum of physical and mental aggregation, the skandhas as they talk about. So this claim entails substantial philosophical consequences, raising fundamental questions concerning the continuity of personal identity, the operation of karma in the absence of persisting subject, and the coherence of liberation without a self as its bearer. So this whole philosophy of Anatmavad does raise various questions, as has been mentioned, that if you talk about personal identity, that the person is the same person at different times, how do we talk about this personal identity when, according to Buddhism, there is no permanent self? Or how do we talk about the theory of karma? Because the theory of karma says that whatever action one does, there has to be a consequence that one has to bear. But if there is no subject, how will we talk about this theory of karma? Again, also about liberation. who is it that is getting liberated if there is no permanent self? And there have been a lot of debates over these questions. Talking about the Buddhist path integrates Shil, that is ethical conduct, Samadhi, which is concentration, and Pragya, that is wisdom. Ethics includes 5 precepts, not as commandments, but as conditions for mental clarity. Concentration develops through mindfulness of breathing, contemplation of impermanence, cultivation of loving kindness and compassion, which is karuna, and absorption states. This is how a Buddhist path can be understood, wherein it's talking about the ethical conduct, how samadhi, concentration and meditation are important, how we need to be mindful of the breathing, how we need to contemplate this impermanence, and how we need to cultivate this loving kindness and compassion, which is the ethical conduct that we need to inculcate in our life. Wisdom here emerges through vipassana, which is insight or meditation investigating the 3 characteristics. These 3 characteristics are impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, anatma, that is not self. The spiritual core lies in direct investigation, discovering that nowhere is there a permanent self, only constantly changing interdependent processes. So, this wisdom can be gathered, inculcated and concentrated upon through the practice of vipassana, and one can reflect on these notions of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness or non-self, which is the core spiritual ideals set by, or you can say in Buddhism, wherein this direct investigation discovering that nowhere there is a permanent self, and that self is constantly changing, and that everything is interdependent. The next is Jainism. Jainism develops a distinct spiritual path centered on radical asceticism and absolute non-violence as ways for liberation. Jeeves or soul intrinsically possess infinite knowledge, perception, bliss and energy, but karmic matter obscures these qualities. So, if we look from the Jain perspective, there has been a strong emphasis on non-violence, and they believe that the Jeeves, the soul, they intrinsically possess these infinite knowledge which is already there in them, perception, bliss and energy. But due to the karmic matter, all these things are in a way obscured, and one becomes ignorant of these qualities. Liberation consists in removing all karmic accumulation, so the soul rises to the Siddhalok in its pure form. The path involves right faith, right knowledge and right conduct, the 3 ratnas as we talk about, particularly 5 great vows: ahimsa, satya, aste, brahmacharya and aparigraha. These are the 5 great vows of Jainism that has been emphasized, and that can be seen as a spiritual path in the Jain traditions, how they focus on the 3 Ratnas and the 5 great vows. The distinctiveness of Jain spirituality lies in uncompromising commitment to ahimsa as the supreme principle. We will discuss the other traditions, spiritual traditions in the coming lecture. So please stay with us. We will be discussing more about it. Thank you.